The Draft Lottery, a live report on tonight's picking of the birth dates for the draft.
Families across America were glued to their television sets, especially those with teenage sons. Among those waiting to learn his fate that night was then teenage anthropology student and future Pulitzer Prize winning novelist Richard Russo. It was the start of the Vietnam War, and it would be that moment of chance that would determine the course of his life.
What I remember most clearly about that evening is actually in the book.
The book, Chances Are, is Russo's first standalone novel in 10 years. The author of 8 books, several screenplays, numerous short stories, and a memoir, Russo won a Pulitzer Prize for his 2001 novel, Empire Falls.
Empire Falls, the novel, and the movie. These are American stories.
She owns the whole town.
It was adapted into an award-winning HBO miniseries featuring a star-studded cast led by actors Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. Newman also directed and starred in the film Nobody's Fool, adapted from Russo's 1993 novel of the same name.
My last several books have really all been about destiny, that weird mix of things that every human life is made up of.
For many years, Russo was a professor of English and American literature before retiring at the age of 47 to pursue writing full-time.
I taught at a number of universities, one pretty close to where we sit right now. I was on the faculty at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale.
My alma mater.
Really?
Salukis,
well,
yes.
all right.
Russo now lives in Maine. Like so many of his books, much of his work is semi-autobiographical, drawing upon his life growing up in upstate New York. Chances Are is set in New England. It opens with 3 old college friends, all 66 years old, who arrive at Martha's Vineyard for a last hurrah, not far from their alma mater.
But the novel really gets going when they realize this night of the draft lottery that they have individual destinies. Because just as their backgrounds are different, one of them gets a very low number and knows that he will be going. Of the 3 friends, Lincoln's came next at 189. Better, but not safe. Not safe enough.
Russo's signature writing about the separation of classes, witty dialogue, and male relationships won't disappoint his fans in Chances Are. He is regarded by many leading critics as the most important writer about Main Street, USA.
Richard Russo, welcome to St. Louis.
Well, it's great to be here.
Well, I wanted to ask you right off the bat, though, coming off from 2001, a Pulitzer Prize winning fictional novel.
Yeah.
Is it tough to follow up on that and come up with other novels as you have, including this latest one, Chances Are?
The trick is to be already halfway into your next book before you get the prize. If for some reason you have delayed, you finished and you waited for the book to come out and you waited to see if it would win a prize, I can imagine it might very well paralyze you. But my habit is always when I finish a book to just start a new one.
Really?
I don't wait. I don't wait for anything. So my next book after that was a novel called Bridge of Sighs. That was a big book, a long book, and I was already halfway through. So there was really no choice but to just continue writing. I was having a good time before, and I just why not finish? I really didn't worry about it an awful lot.
So has writing always been a part of your life?
God, no. I came to it pretty late. I went to the university where I thought I wanted to major in anthropology until I discovered what it was. And I noticed that an awful lot of the pretty girls were in the English department, so I went over there, studied literature, and was almost finished with a PhD before the writing bug caught me. And it was really because I was in this enormous office space, divided into partitions. There were 36 of us graduate students in there.
Now, what school is this?
This was the University of Arizona in Tucson. Yeah. And with 35 other instructors in there, I just looked around one day and it seemed like all the people who were having fun were in creative writing. That didn't seem fair. Yeah. So I went across the hall, knocked on the door, and said, I don't know, I think I might want to be a writer. And the guy on the other side of the desk said, well, show me a story. And I said, well, I haven't written one yet. And he said, well, that would be the first, that would be the first thing.
If you have any talent, yeah.
So I wrote a story, and it was really bad. After I started, it was, nothing has ever been clearer in my life than that decision once I got going.
So we know what drew you to creative writing, but what kept you going once you started in college?
Well, I like to say that I come from a long line of, let's call them bull throwers.
Gotcha.
For me, there's never really any shortage of material because there's no end to human foolishness. And that's really, I think, my grand subject over all of these years. It's not a mistake that 2 of my novels have the word fool in the title. And I'm just greatly entertained watching people, watching them, trying to get through life as best they can, trying to have a little dignity in this world, a world that seems to refuse it to them as often as not.
Yeah.
Watching people respond to life's tribulations and joys.
And the choices we make and how we respond to those
Absolutely.
situations.
Yeah. And it's, my last several books have really all been about destiny, that weird mix of things that every human life is made up of, those things that we really have no choice over. Think of heredity, genetics.
Yeah.
Those things that we do have a choice over, although we don't always recognize what those are, where we can have some impact on our lives. And then, of course, every now and then the dice get rolled, and chance rears its ugly head.
And now that you say that, that's kind of happens with Chances Are in this book. Let's describe for our listeners, our viewers too, what that's about.
Yeah.
So you've got three guys gone to college, different backgrounds, and they become buddies.
Yeah. Well, the book begins with, I wouldn't call it a game of chance, but the book does begin with a lottery, and it's 1969, the first Vietnam draft lottery, of which I was an unwilling participant, shall we call it?
So you drew a little bit from your experience.
I certainly drew that from my experience. I remember and a lot of what I remember most clearly about that evening is actually in the book. I have these 3 friends who have met in college, and yes, they come from widely different backgrounds, in a sense geographically very different. Right. While one comes from the western United States, one comes from the center, and one comes from the East Coast. What they have in common is that they're in a very expensive, very posh, exclusive, small liberal arts college that I kind of made up for my own purposes. They come together, and their bond really is in a way is a class bond, which is true of a lot of my novels are about class, first and foremost. And they come together because they're scholarship kids on a campus where just about everybody else there believes they have every right to be there. They're not staggered. They and their parents are not staggered by the tuition.
Right.
But these 3 guys find themselves all slinging hash in a sorority house, where, of course, being who they are, fall in love with the same girl, JC. But the novel really kicks in when these 3 guys, they have a motto, they think of themselves as the 3 Musketeers, all for one and one for all. They think of themselves as a kind of unit, and JC is their 4th Musketeer. But the novel really gets going when they realize this night of the draft lottery that they have individual destinies. Because just as their backgrounds are different, one of them gets a very low number and knows that he will be going. Right. One has a number in the high 100s and doesn't know his life is on hold now for the foreseeable future. And one has a very high draft number, the number 322, which by no coincidence was my draft number, and my life changed. That day when you wanted more than anything else to be lucky, I was lucky that day.
Yeah. So did you base at least one of the characters on a buddy of yours who might have gotten a low number?
Yeah, one of my good friends who was in the room that night. I also was in a hasher room. I was slinging hash at a sorority, and one of my friends did get the number 9. So I used that number. But really, what I really wanted was for someone to have a low number, someone to have a number right in the middle, and someone to have a very high number, to give readers a sense of just how incredibly momentous that was. Whatever your dreams, whatever your schemes, whatever your plans for maybe getting married, as one of my guys is going to be doing pretty quickly, or thinks he is, that whatever you sense you had, if you're all with a bunch of friends in a room and you think you're all in the same boat, and suddenly you find you're not in the same boat at all. And sometimes the vessel you're in might be small and leaky. And suddenly, I mean, the world changed that night for those of us who
certainly.
And one of the astonishing.
And you do a good job about, excuse me, do a good job about the emotions from each of them.
Well, and thank you. But one of the joys of being on book tour with this book, I might have predicted this, although I didn't, was that just about everywhere I've gone at the end of the evening, several people in that line want to tell me either what their number was, or they want to tell me that they remember where they were. And it's not all men either. There are a lot of women in the audience who want to tell me a story about their brother or their boyfriend or fiance. And this particular moment in time, I had a woman the other night tell me and say in the Q&A, she wanted to know if this still brought profound emotion in me. She said, because when I started reading that section, I read the section about the lottery, and when I started reading that, she said she felt her throat close up. And she said she hadn't really thought about it in a very long time, but I was no more than 3 or 4 sentences into what I was reading before she became very emotionally involved with all of that. And
I would think men would be too. I mean, because so many Vietnam vets are still around, and those who served and those who didn't. And again, I don't want to give anything away about what the journey that each of these 3 characters took.
Right, there are some surprises.
Yes, there are. And I found, you call her JC, she's the female character, the strongest of the others. Kind of a tragic figure. Am I correct in feeling that way?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
I mean,
and I mean, again, as we talk about destiny, the things that life throws at us, without going into too much specifically, I mean, if ever you thought life was being kind to somebody, you would have thought it was JC. I mean, she grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, the daughter of very wealthy white parents, money for everything she would have wanted, from piano lessons to trips to Europe as a child. All of those things, the world really was her oyster, and being at Minerva College, where they all 4 meet, was just a natural extension of this. And you would have expected that as for so many people who fall into this category, that life would have continued as it began. And
there's a big mystery that unfolds in this.
She is the center. What happens to JC is really the center of this book.
And you bring that up pretty early on too in the book as well, so that we follow this journey while they're having their reunion at 66 years old. Later on, they still keep in touch, but they haven't seen each other in a decade. Have you done something similar with that with some of your buddies?
I have not. I've stayed close with several friends from that era, but we tend to hook up separately. Whoever's around, whoever is around who's heading east will duck in. I've got a couple of my college roommates who will duck in. And I was out in Arizona recently at a book festival in Tucson, and I saw a couple of my friends, but never a formal thing like that, especially not as with these guys, because they all meet. They don't all meet together just in one place. They all meet together on an island, which is kind of, it's almost like an Agatha Christie story in that sense. When you put people in a really restricted area, right. It kind of ups the dramatic stakes.
Right. Plus, there was some history there too.
Yes, there is some history
right.
there as well.
So why you tend to write about men? There's been that signature theme of yours of including that. You have a lot of irony and some regret as well, and at least with this one. But why do you tend to write about men?
Well, I think it's because I've always wondered what a man is. It's as simple as that. My parents split up when I was young. My father was absent through much of my youth and adolescence. And so at a time when a lot of boys and men are looking to their fathers or maybe their grandfathers, because my grandfather got ill and died when I was fairly young. My father was absent mostly until I was like 17 or 18. I became interesting to him because at 18 I was legal to drink. This was in upstate New York, so we became pals after that. But I think at a time when most young guys are wondering what it means to be a man, they look to their fathers and their grandfathers and their uncles. I was an only child. There wasn't a lot of male presence. Right. And so I think I found myself trying to answer that question, because even as my father was absent, because he was nearby, he was this remarkable figure, because I knew such contradictory things about him. He was a World War II. My father was a Normandy guy.
Wow.
And I knew he was a war hero. And so in that sense, that's an image of a man, right?
Right.
But at a crucial point, I think when he came back from the war, I mean, he was a young, handsome guy when he went over there. You see I have pictures of my father in his uniform before he left for the war, and he's a boy. And by the time he got back, he was a middle-aged man. That's what he looked like by the time he got back. I think the last thing in the world that he wanted was to be married, to have a house, a mortgage. He was just celebrating the fact that he was alive when so many men weren't. And so he was gone. So is that what men did? So I think at the time in your life when you're thinking a lot about these things, these become questions that on the one hand you never resolve, which I suppose in one sense can be a problem. There's a question that there's no answer to. On the other hand, for an author, it's such a gift, because the unanswered and unanswerable questions are the ones that novels come out of. So those were tremendous gifts. And so in this book, as in so many of my books, my characters get to look at various facets of manhood, and I get to continue to query.
Yes, and they do that
question.
Yeah. I mean, definitely throughout this, you go back and forth between the father, with these three.
Yep.
Yeah, now older men.
Yep.
Going back to their youth, but their relationship with their father and their mother.
Yep.
is definitely front and center.
It's clueless. Yeah, I mean, it's yes, that's right. Their relationships with their fathers in particular, but also with all three of these young men, now old men, their mothers play a greater role in their lives than they imagine at the time.
Right.
Lincoln, whose house they're in on Martha's Vineyard, when the novel opens, Lincoln has come to Martha's Vineyard to sell his mother's beloved house. And Lincoln has
yelling
always
at him, no, through the book. No, you're not selling this house.
Yeah. And Lincoln has always considered himself to be his father's son, and in many ways he is. I mean, his father is kind of a domineering guy, and he's gotten his own way in his life and in Lincoln's life. His mother stands up to his father like 2 times in her entire life. She stands up to his father, and yet he's discovering, here's a man 66 years old who's discovering something that he had no idea of, which was just how profound his mother's effect on him has been.
by being there, by being at that house.
Yeah, I mean his father's still alive and still ruling his particular roost, but
although
his mother's
he
been
changes
gone for a
along the
while.
way too. At the very end. Yeah, very interesting. So, and I found it interesting reading about you that you have 2 daughters who are both in the business, but yet you still write. Again, you explained it now, but having these male-dominated characters. Yeah. And now you explain why, because those are some unanswered questions for you.
And it's been one of the joys of having daughters. One of the many joys of having daughters was that if I had had sons, I think it would have really troubled me to. I would have thought I was supposed to know something. If the question that's been driving you all of these years is a question that you know the answer to. What is it to be a man? Then you convey that to your sons. If you don't know the answer to that question, if you're still puzzling through that at a time when you become a father of sons, that would have terrified me because. But with girls are wonderful. I wasn't supposed to know anything.
And you could always use that line.
So I wasn't a disappointment to myself or to others.
Or just go ask your mother. She'll take over. So what have you learned about men then in this after so many years of writing?
Fortunately, not much, which means that I can still continue to write about it. I think we tend. The old writing proverb is write what you know, and there's a certain element of truth to that. But the things that we keep coming back to are the great mysteries of our lives. I always think of Dickens in this respect, and you say to yourself, I mean, you march across that tremendous trajectory of Dickens' work, which was in his world is so full of all of the things that he knew, and he knew a lot. I mean, he's one of those 19th century writers who felt competent to go anywhere in this enormous world. And you could follow him through his journeys all through his life. But you could also ask him, why so many orphans? Yeah. How many orphans does one writer need? Right. And it's because I think at some point in his life Dickens felt orphaned. When his father went to debtor's prison and he suddenly didn't have a family anymore, certainly not a reliable family. His sense of abandonment was so profound that it became the kind of deep and abiding mystery and that he would just never get to the bottom of, and that was his good news.
Did you feel a little bit of that sense of a relationship with Dickens because of your father leaving?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I remember when I was in high school, and looking back at it now, I kind of think I understand why I stopped reading the book. I think I had to stop when I discovered that Magwitch, the criminal that Pip meets on the marsh at the beginning of that book, is his father.
Yeah, profound.
In high school.
Yeah.
I was done.
Yeah.
I was out of there.
Right. So Dickens is. You said that that several authors have played a role in your career.
Yep.
So obviously Dickens. Anyone else?
Twain was very important. Was very important to me because I am, despite the fact that I go to dark places in my novels, I am a comic writer. I think.
You have a right sense of humor. Some of your characters show that.
Well, comic in the sense of ha-ha, but I think also more importantly, comic in the sense of optimistic. Mm-hmm. Shakespearean comedies end with people recognizing who they are once their disguises are taken away, and they end in marriage. Those are the traditional comedic endings. But Twain taught me that you can go to very dark places, like he did in Huckleberry Finn, but if you go armed with humor, people will let you write a book about racism. They'll let you write a book about ignorance. They'll let you write a book about violence. They'll let you write a book about the parts of the American character that we're less comfortable with.
Both your daughters have gone into the biz. One owned a bookstore in Portland, Maine, and the other one, you said, just finished her first novel.
Yeah. My daughter Emily opened a bookstore in Portland a few years ago, and she's one of this new generation of young, intrepid, new independent booksellers. And my other daughter, Kate, her first love was painting, and she's a very talented painter. And I think she tried I think she tried not to be a writer and not to write for about as long as she could, and she finally threw in the towel. Her first novel will be coming out in the spring.
That would be kind of exciting, but a lot of pressure on her to follow in Pulitzer Prize winning father's footsteps.
Yeah, and I would love if there were some way to take some of that pressure off. I would love it.
You would not give back that Pulitzer Prize.
Well,
come on.
Well, what I'm hoping is that she surpasses her old man in so many ways. That's what I would love.
Yeah.
And I would love for her to have what I would love, which is completely unrealistic, of course, is to have all of the advantages that comes with a writer father and none of the disadvantages.
Do you feel like you have another Pulitzer Prize novel in you?
I think I have another novel in me.
Another novel, okay.
I will begin writing a new novel very soon. Too soon to talk about it, but I think it's there.
What was that moment like? Let's go back to that. I mean, I guess you submitted. I don't know the process, but there's a panel of, I guess, literature experts from all around the world.
Well, your publisher submits it.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't get to submit to those things. Your publisher submits it. In the case of Empire Falls, I had written it off as certainly for the Pulitzer because all the other big awards had already been given. The National Book Award had been given. Penn Faulkner had been given. National Book Critics Circle Award had been given. The Pulitzer is always the last. Mm-hmm. Even some of the regional, the New England Book Award had already been given. And I hadn't even been longlisted for any of those. So I had just ruled it out. I knew the day that it was going to be announced. But a friend of mine and I had a regular tennis date, and he and I went out and played tennis, and we played. It was a good match, and we played longer than usual. And when I came back home, I no sooner pulled up into the driveway than my wife came out onto the porch, and the look on her face, I knew that either someone we loved had died or I'd won the prize. she'd been answering the phone for like an hour.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet a fellow Saluki too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
It's been a joy.